I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing good. So, thanks for chatting with me today. For everyone listening, we're doing a quick xAPI kind of state of the industry update with Mr. Aaron Silvers. So, Aaron, do you want to give a quick introduction, talk about kind of your involvement with xAPI for anyone that might not know?
Sure. My name is Aaron Silvers. I've been involved in leading the xAPI effort from, its napkin sketch and its initial sketches in 2008 to still kind of today in terms of helping organize an industry consortium and doing a lot of evangelism outside of ADL. That's pretty much the shortest way I could explain my involvement.
Yeah. And we've been keeping in touch with you since, I think, when did the spec start? Like you said, 2008. I think we did an interview with you in 2013, did another update on the blog last year.
Mhm. Yes, we did. We started the actual spec development work began in 2012. That was already after a lot of early prototyping that had been done through Rust C software and ADL through ADL. And then almost a year later to the day, about a year and a month, we launched version 1.0 of the spec, and it has largely stayed more or less intact since then. So there's been a couple minor version changes, updates since then, but they're all like more clarifications, punctuation, grammar, things like that, things that make the spec clearer to understand and, taking away the ambiguities. So
yeah, sure. Cool. So last year you did a blog post and kind of wrote about some emerging patterns of usage with xAPI. So can you give us an update? Tell us what's been going on since that last post, which was about a year ago.
Sure. So, again, the spec came out as a version 1.0 in 2013, and end of April 2013. And last year we wrote that blog post where we talked about like what things were happening, what does adoption look like. And at that time, like the adoption was still kind of nascent. Like, you have this, the Gartner hype cycle. They talk about how you have like, this, raised expectations and then this trough of disillusionment, because I think that people began to, it launched with a lot of promise, and people could articulate, a couple of, like, I would say, the low-hanging fruit use cases. And then it got to the point where, well, there's no turnkey solutions for this stuff, so it's kind of hard to do. It's not so much that any one part of the technical stuff is difficult, but it's just like all the amount of effort, the resourcing, the allocations, the coordination of different groups within enterprises to actually work together on stuff, getting new types of software in, like learning record stores and stuff like that behind firewalls, or dealing with software as a service and concerns, justified or no, about privacy and security of data. All of that stuff just makes it difficult. But what's happened since then, it really I would say probably since around November of last year, we've seen a huge uptick in terms of like organizations coming out of the woodwork and actually talking about their experiences of using xAPI and highlighting and showcasing like the things that they are actually doing. And so a lot of the patterns we talked about last year, certainly those are the patterns that we've been seeing, and then some. There has been a lot more interest in I would say the use of medical devices in terms of bringing those into enterprise infrastructure, and those stakeholders are looking at xAPI as a very easy, approachable means of doing that. We're starting to talk with folks in the HR standards world, and they are also looking at xAPI as a means to modernize their infrastructure for HRIS systems and performance support systems to talk to each other. And those are the players like, the SAPs, the Oracles of the world, where they're starting to talk about using xAPI to do that. And as that's happening, learning departments in really large organizations, huge enterprises with lots and lots of, obviously IT infrastructure, they're already making the inroads in terms of like having the hard conversations about, do we go with a SaaS service for learning record stores? What kind of middleware do we want to develop on our own in order to feed information from our CRM systems and some of our other performance systems, and bring that into an LRS, and then what kind of analytics or informatics do we want to pull out of that stuff? So there's a lot of those conversations that are starting to happen now. A lot of it, again, centers around systems integration, and a lot of doing a lot of things with what the sales world would call KPIs, key performance indicators.
Right. So you mentioned LRSs real quick, and some people listening might know what those are, some might not. Can you give like a quick 30, 60-second description of what is an LRS and how it kind of fits in with the xAPI systems?
Sure thing. So a learning records, LRS stands for Learning Record Store. It's in the specification for xAPI. It's the mechanism by which we define that there is some kind of endpoint that allows you to store and retrieve all the data that you're collecting with xAPI. It's not necessary to have a learning record store in order to do xAPI, but it does make a lot of things easier because it's spelled out.
Right. So it's something that could work with an LMS, interdependently of an LMS.
Absolutely. So it was intended to be specified as basically an independent feature, not necessarily as its own enterprise system. Whereas when SCORM was developed with all 1,700 pages of it, an LMS was very clearly defined as its own kind of product. And now, we've kind of abstracted from that where, the LRS defines a set of functionality, and it can certainly be something that is part of or integrated with a learning management system or any other system as well. Right.
Cool. Thanks. So you talked a little bit about adoption being on the uptick and talked broadly about some industries that are using xAPI. Can you talk about like a specific use case or someone that's implemented it in a specific way and what they're doing with it?
I can give you a couple of them that come to the top of mind. So there's a really large organization that controls about 20% of the United States' energy grid. They're called PJM. And they use an LMS, Risk, and they, for any number of reasons, they have a lot of compliance issues. They have a lot of, I would say, let's just say that because they're a high stakes environment for compliance, being an energy company. There's a lot of need to control documents, including work documents, performance support documents, etc. But they want to make them available to people, who are working out in the field. And so what Risk did with Float Learning was develop a mobile application that worked with their LMS particularly, where the LMS controls the access to the documents based on who you are and what access you're supposed to have to certain types of documents, which is great. The mobile app acted as basically your Kindle app, but for these PDFs. So you could annotate them, you could highlight, doing all these things. That's great. They used in order to keep track of all the types of annotation stuff like that, they used xAPI to do that, which in and of itself, it provided a lot of value to the end users because they could, no matter what device they were on, as long as they were logged in, they could pull in all the information that they already had. That was great. What became more interesting was when PJM approached Risk originally was they want to be able to understand how people are using these documents so that they can improve them, which is a great business reason to be doing something like this. So that's when, particularly we got involved with working with Risk, and we developed a dashboard for them that basically pulled the information out of the LRS and converted it into basically a couple different data visualizations, including, recreating those PDFs in a web interface with hotspots over the actual pages on the PDF, so you could see exactly how people were using these documents, what words were being highlighted, what phrases were being highlighted, what notes people were taking with it. You could also see at the sidebar exactly what pages of these documents were never touched.
Right.
And that kind of insight is something that I think a lot of organizations need and crave and have not been able to do until the advent of something like xAPI.
Yeah. I think that brings up kind of a key factor is when you take a step back and look at the power of xAPI, it really is about information and being able to figure out what people are doing and break down some specific analytics there.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of talk about we pay a lot of lip service to learning, and obviously rightfully so. I mean, we do care about learning, but when you get right down to it, it's particularly when it comes to adult learning, and particularly in the workplace, we're really interested in performance.
Sure.
And you can't really have performance unless you actually have some measures by which you can do that. And that doesn't happen without data. And the way to do that, in a way that makes it easy for us to do it is with xAPI. It's a lot easier to do xAPI than with Google Analytics, particularly for the types of uses that we're working with.
Right. So I think that kind of brings up another good question is, what type of skills do the traditional L&D audience or instructional designers need to have to effectively design and utilize the power of the xAPI?
Well, there's a lot to that question. I think, going back to the basics of talking about instructional design, and I'm not talking about a process like ADDIE, but I'm talking about really like in terms of like the deeper analysis and the deeper design issues of like, what is the problem that we're really trying to solve, and what is the way in which we can affect behavior changes in order to manifest that change. And I think about that a lot when I look at what experienced designers are doing. In other spaces like retail spaces, online, et cetera, and particularly around events and things like that. There's a lot that goes into, like, you're not just telling people exactly what to do. You're creating the space in which that encourages them to do right. Certain things, and you're encouraging certain behaviors to happen, right? So it's more of a nudge than a thou shalt, and
right.
and that difference, I think, is very inviting for a lot of folks. And so thinking about that, borrowing from what interaction design, what user experience design is doing, in those spaces, and then thinking very critically about like the thing, it's one thing to talk about Kirkpatrick, and that's great. It's another thing to actually do formative evaluation and formative assessment and think about what are the questions that we want answered, not just so that we can, not necessarily to assess that the user knows this stuff, because knowing is impossible, but we can make a lot of assertions, and we can gather evidence, and we can use a lot of this information to improve our materials and thereby like keep doing the measurements that demonstrate better outcomes. And
sure.
That's that link between what we as designers and developers do of learning experiences, and thinking about the whole experience instead of one piece of content necessarily being the end-all be-all of that one particular learning experience.
Right. So break down what's going on in the community right now. Like, what are some events coming up? What are you seeing people kind of spend their energy on? What's happening?
It's a great year for xAPI stuff, man. So we, at the end of March, we had an xAPI camp that was, I would say, pretty successful. And then there are more in the works being planned right now. I think we have one that's going to be coming up in November for sure. There might be one before then as well. And we have some events that we're starting to plan into next year for that. Right before ATD ICE, Riptide Software is hosting an event called for the launch of a service they're calling Try xAPI. It's at tryxapi.com. Actually, here I'll present the link. And what they're looking to do is create like a curated collection of use cases, case studies, actually things that people have actually been doing with xAPI, and mapping different open source solutions, more of the turnkey kind of things that they can pull down from open source, and then kind of explain to folks in the context of these case studies, like, here's what people are doing with xAPI. Here's the open source tools that are available to you that you could actually replicate some of these things yourself. So it's a pretty novel approach. There is next week on May 12th, not March 12th, on May 12th, there's a HT2 and their tool Curator is beginning a 4-week MOOC, massively open online course on learning xAPI. And the hashtag will be Learn xAPI. And I'm involved with that. Janet Efron, Sean Putman, Ben Betts, obviously, and there's going to be a lot of other folks who are jumping in now to participate in that and help, organize, feed information. Martin Cousins, Sam Burrows over in the UK. So we have a lot of British folks too, lots of evil villain accents going on. So like, and that's all just happening in May,
Yeah.
Like that's just May.
Yeah, so you mentioned the conference. Definitely there's going to be a few concurrent sessions there on it. Lots of vendors in the expo hall that are doing stuff with xAPI. So if you're going to be at the international conference, which is less than 10 days away, definitely look for some stuff going on there in addition to the event that Aaron mentioned going on the 16th.
Yeah, it's the presence for xAPI has been growing and growing and growing in a lot of the learning conferences, and we're starting to see it spill over even into other spaces as well, which is fascinating and awesome to me that we did something within our own industry that other industries, other verticals are actually finding real value in, and I think that's pretty awesome.
Kind of the reverse of how it usually goes.
Well. Yeah, and what's interesting, I think, is that there's a lot of we don't get a lot of credit for the our kind of like tacit understanding of cognitive science and behavioral science, where there's a lot of other verticals that need that information, and we actually have it. And as we shift from ourselves from thinking about ourselves as producers of e-learning or producers of instruction to designers of behavior change, but to designers of performance outcomes,
right?
Like those are the types of things where I think we're going to start seeing the transition in our entire field moving and branching out into really integrating with other work.
Right. Cool. So if people want to keep up with what's going on with xAPI, where should they be going online? Who should they be following on Twitter? Like, where do you go to kind of keep your ear to the ground to know what's happening?
Well, I go to a lot of places. I go to a lot of places, so I would hope that nobody has to work that hard to follow what's going on. No, I mean there are, I would say, look on the xAPI hashtag on Twitter and see who's actually talking about it.
Yeah.
And then I would say, we have a site called Connections Forum. We've been posting video from the events that we're having. We're going to be connecting in with the Learn xAPI work that's going to be happening. There's going to be an actual more traditional course that's going to start launching. I think it's going to be around beginning of June. Sean Putman and Janet Efron are putting that together, and we're going to kind of help with them with that effort as well. I would say just pay attention to those areas. Obviously, ADL is always putting on a lot of really good information, and there's a lot of exciting work that's happening in terms of the communities of practice. Those recipes are starting to emerge as well. I don't know. There's so many places to go to, man. I would say just follow me, because lately that seems to be all I talk about on Twitter.
Cool. All right, Aaron. Well, thanks for chatting with me. And maybe we should not wait another year to do another one of these. Maybe we should do something in the summer, kind of after all the craziness of May happens. We can kind of see where things are.
That would be awesome, Justin. I'm always happy to put on a Hawaiian shirt for you.
Cool, man. Well, thanks.
Take care, brother.